Hello, and welcome to the Pentester Academy webinar. I'm Andrea Donlevy, and I will be your host during this webcast. In just a few moments, we will go to John Gamble from Corelight, who will be discussing network security's best-kept secret, Bro. John is the Director of Marketing at Corelight and has a decade of experience working in the data protection industry, representing privacy, security, and identity verification products, including his most recent role as Director of Product Marketing at Lookout, a mobile endpoint security company. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit it in a chat window to all panelists. All questions will be held until the end of the webinar during our Q&A portion, and we will answer as many as we can with the time provided. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, and it looks like we are ready, so I'll hand it over to John.
Thank you for that introduction. Now for today's webcast, a technical introduction to Bro, network security's best kept secret. I'm John Gamble again, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Corelight. We'll talk a little bit at the end about what Corelight does, but really today's presentation is about Bro, the open source network security monitoring software. Our agenda today, first we'll talk about the world that you might be operating in as a security professional without Bro in your environment. Next, we'll start to introduce ourselves to Bro and what its capabilities are. In the third section, we'll actually look in pretty specific technical detail and use case examples of exactly how Bro can give you better network data than some of the network data you might be using today. And lastly, we'll talk about Corelight for a little bit and just give you a picture of what we as a company can offer with relation to Bro. And at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. So save your questions for the end, and I will be happy to answer them. A world without Bro. It's a sad world. This picture often makes people in the security world laugh because it kind of represents what a lot of SIEMs, security incident event management systems, look like today. You know, you've got all your data in one place, but it's not necessarily well organized. It doesn't interconnect well. It's coming from a variety of different places, and it's all kind of thrown into one room, if you will. And it's hard to make fast decisions and get fast insight out of a room that's organized like this. And it's not really a fault of the SIEM per se. It's really about the varying data structures and varying data sources that you're relying on as a security incident responder or threat hunter or security architect to understand your environment. And it's just getting data from all these different places, and it just doesn't talk well with each other. So if you look at kind of the sources of data that you could be putting into your SIEM or a data lake, if you will, you've got network traffic data, data coming off of your live network traffic. You've got host data, that's data about your endpoints in your environment, like your PCs and laptops running in your corporate environment, organizational environment. Logs generated by any number of systems in that environment, reporting on various activities within those systems. And then intelligence feeds from either internal intelligence sources or third-party threat intelligence feeds. These are typically the four types of data that you're putting into a SIEM or a data lake. But really today's presentation, we're going to talk about network traffic data because that's what Bro is squarely focused on. And I'd argue that network traffic data is probably among the most important of those data sources, if not the most important in many cases. And that's because hosts, endpoints are great sources of information if they're reliable. But at the end of the day, they can be compromised, and the reliability of what they're telling you can be compromised as well. Network traffic is network traffic. It can't lie. Certainly bad guys try to hide inside of network traffic by doing tricky things like hiding in non-standard ports. But at the end of the day, all attacks really have to go through the network, and it's pretty policy neutral data that's passing through in the sense of it is what it is. So when you're looking at your network traffic data sources today, and I'm assuming that you're probably not using the Bro Network Security Monitor as a data source for your network traffic, you're probably dealing with a couple of different things. So that's that middle column, right? You might be collecting PCAP on a rolling basis. Some people collect PCAP, which is full network traffic packet capture, where you're literally collecting every bit and byte crossing the wire. It's 100% of what's happening on the network traffic, but it's a ton of data, and it can be very difficult to make sense of. And you can't store it for long because of the costs. So most people are storing it for at most 30 to 90 days at scale. You might also be using Netflow, which is a data source that describes at a high level communications going across the network, the kind of who talking to who and when, bits of metadata, a phone call record, if you will. And you might also be using a whole range of logs being generated by your various systems and servers inside of your network. You know, DNS servers generate DNS logs. You might be getting FTP logs from your FTP servers, et cetera. And that's probably what you're using today in terms of network traffic data source. And it can be really challenging to interrelate all of these various data sources together to make sense of what's happening on your network. And there are consequences to this bad jigsaw puzzle that you kind of accept as an unavoidable puzzle you have to solve, but it's really not. And we'll talk about how Bro can really change the way you approach this problem. But if you're not using Bro, you're probably trying to assemble this jigsaw puzzle. If you're an incident responder and you're trying to respond to a security alert generated by maybe an IDS system, you know, you're probably familiar with this puzzle solving exercise. And the challenges with this, of course, are that you've got blind spots. You don't have all of your bases covered. Some of your data sources don't give you enough information about what's happening. Like Netflow, for example, is really only going to give you a high-level call record of who's talking to who. It's not going to tell you what they're talking about, which is critically important. You know, another one is it's just going to slow your overall response time, whether that's threat hunting or incident response or just general, you know, security defense where you're trying to make adjustments to your environment to better defend yourself. If you don't have great data and you're spending time trying to connect the dots between different data types, it's going to slow your response time. And response time is critical in the world of security, right? You need to be able to respond fast and identify attacks as early as possible, and also respond and remediate to successful attacks as quickly as possible. So you're exposing yourself to more risk if you're only relying on data sources like these. And then lastly, if people go undetected on your network, typically large-scale breaches, sophisticated breaches take weeks, months, or years for the attackers to successfully carry out in some cases. And bad visibility on your network because you don't have the right data sources that you can interconnect, those attacks are going to go undetected for longer and ultimately cause more damage in your organization. So what's Bro? It's kind of a funny name, I'll admit. It's actually a very old, by many comparisons of modern technology, open source framework. It was invented in 1995, so over 20 years ago, by a gentleman named Vern Paxson at Berkeley. And Vern was trying to basically understand really high volume throughput network traffic running through Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory at the time, and an environment, a national lab that was facing threat actors in 1995 that most organizations couldn't even fathom. Today, more commonplace, especially among larger Fortune 2000 companies. But back then, national labs connected to the internet were a target and were doing high volume traffic throughput. And Vern realized that no tool existed to really parse and understand that network traffic at scale for security analysis and for understanding the network environment. So he invented and wrote the kind of initial framework for Bro. I said it's kind of a funny name. It actually stands for Big Brother. It was meant as a warning because, of course, as all monitoring technology can be, it can be used for good or evil if you're not using it correctly in your environment. So he named it Bro as kind of a warning about its dual capability set and a reminder to be responsible with the software. And Bro at its heart does three key things. Number one, it generates comprehensive protocol-specific logs for all of your traffic. So there are over 35 different protocols that Bro analyzes today. The neat thing about Bro is if you want to analyze a new protocol, like a Bitcoin mining protocol, you can write and modify Bro to do that. It's very flexible. But the number one thing that most people use Bro for is to generate these really rich descriptive logs that comprehensively summarize what's happening on the wire. The second thing Bro can do that's important for a security context is file extraction. So, every day, depending on the size of your organization, you could have tens, hundreds, or hundreds of thousands of files, if you're big enough, crossing the network, PDFs, JPEGs, exe files, etc. And often, in many cases, those files can be a problem in a security context when it comes to attacks, right? Payloads are often delivered through files. And so file analysis is a really critical aspect of security. Bro helps you get all of those files crossing the network, extracts them and reassembles them and allows you to store them in a location for later forensic analysis, or you can put those files directly into a file analysis tool. And the third thing that Bro does is it allows for analysis automation. You can automate analysis on top of all of those logs and files that Bro is looking at and generating and extracting Bro is actually a scripting language unto itself. It's a unique scripting language, and Bro scripts are basically scripts that you can program yourself once you understand how to program in Bro to do pretty much anything you can conceive of within the scope of the data Bro collects. So you can do things like Bro looks at files. When it extracts files, it takes a measurement of the file's entropy. And you can actually write a script if you wanted that said, if the entropy of a file increases, then send me an alert. And that might be evidence of a ransomware attack, because ransomware typically is encrypting files, and that's resulting in a higher entropy measurement on that file. So number 3 is often overlooked, I would say, in some of the Bro community, just because the richness of the data in number 1 and number 2 is so powerful. But for the power users of Bro today who are really using number 3, it's an incredibly powerful functionality of Bro. One organization we know of has written over 80 unique Bro scripts inside their environment that are uniquely tailored to what they've observed in their network over many, many years of analysis. And so it really gives them really high fidelity alerts and monitoring capabilities that go well beyond kind of traditional commercial IDS or IPS solutions. So quickly, how does Bro work? Bro needs to get a copy of the network traffic. It doesn't plug in directly into the traffic itself. It's not an inline software, so you actually have to generate a copy of that live network traffic via a span port or a packet broker or a optical tap. But once Bro gets a copy of that live network traffic, it's basically, it's a protocol parsing engine. So I mentioned it can parse over 35 different protocols. It also has a script interpreter, so it can read and execute against Bro scripts if you're looking to do custom analysis against those logs. And it also does file extraction, as I mentioned. So at the top there, you see what are some of the use cases of how people are using Bro. Well, they're using Bro to hunt for threats in their environment. They're using it for file extraction to send to file analysis frameworks. They're using it for forensics. You can also use Bro for things like vulnerability tracking, because Bro actually generates, as part of the network traffic analysis, logs that describe the version and type of software being used in your environment. So quickly, just to recap those 3 things Bro does. Bro, it's a comprehensive network logging tool. It takes raw network traffic and transforms it into rich network protocol specific logs. The screenshots you see here are, you can't read them, they're too small, but that's okay. They're actually representative of actual Bro logs. So there's a DNS log in there, there's a files log, there's an FTP log. Each of those fields, those white and gray boxes, are data points that Bro collects and packages within those logs. And it does it for all traffic all the time, as long as you're enabling Bro. So you get this really rich historical record of what happened. And the connection log here on the left that's zoomed in on a bit is kind of like your Netflow record, except it's Netflow on steroids. You can see immediately by the size of that log file that you're already getting a ton of rich information that's not included in a typical Netflow record. We'll talk more about that in detail a little bit later. Oh, second point, right? Bro is a file extraction tool, so it can extract and reassemble files off the wire. Any file type, it's really not limited at all in that respect. And it also generates a separate log that goes with files called the files log, which has that entropy measurement that I mentioned earlier. And lastly, Bro is a scripting tool, right? You can program Bro to basically do whatever you want it to do in terms of analysis, monitoring, and detection. So today, there are actually over 60 community Bro scripts in the open source world on GitHub. So you could go there today, you could set up your Bro instance, and you could start trying out some of these scripts that other developers in the open source Bro community have contributed. For example, there's one script called the JA3 script. It was written by a few developers at Salesforce, and they've used this script to generate SSL client fingerprints. So that it's a really useful script because it basically allows you to track the use of SSL clients within your environment, and you can start doing things like whitelisting and blacklisting certain SSL clients that you know are bad or you know are good and you want to whitelist. So very helpful script, very popular script among the 60 that are available. Deployment of Bro, I talked a little bit about this. Again, it's an out-of-band solution. It's not inline, so you need to download the software and then configure it on your own hardware if you're going to run an open source implementation of Bro. So Bro is just software. To actually get it to run, you're going to need to buy and configure your own server platform to run it on. But you've got to get a copy of traffic to Bro. So again, packet broker, tap, span port, etc., gives you that copy of that traffic. And you can export those Bro logs to really anywhere you like. SIEM, analytics, whatever data lake you might have. You can put the extracted files in storage, or you can send them to a file analysis framework like Palo Alto Networks or FireEye, for example. And as you see here, it's positioned against IDS, IPS, and Netflow and PCAP. It's often not a replacement in any sense for those solutions. It's complementary and really fills a lot of holes left by those solutions, and also accelerates some of those solutions like IDS or IPS, where your incident responders are now getting alerts from the IDS solution, looking in their SIEM, and now they can resolve incidents way faster because they have bro logs to understand exactly what happened and if that alert is a true positive or a false positive. So really quickly, bro makes incident response faster. It unlocks new threat hunting capabilities, and really the way we think about it is it's rocket fuel for both your people and your tools. So when you have better data and you have better visibility about your network environment, you can move faster and do more things more efficiently and more effectively with bro. And we also see some leading organizations starting to build bro into a network security stack that looks pretty different from a lot of other companies out there. And we think this is probably the future of what this, where this is headed, which is that bro is really the foundational layer of network visibility that transforms the raw traffic into human readable, but also machine readable data that gets pumped up into the other systems that layer on top, such as a SIEM, security analytics platform, orchestration and automation platforms, and ultimately investigation and hunting by your threat hunters. So, when you start at that base layer with bro and you give rich, comprehensive, usable data, everything upstream gets better. And we're seeing a lot of companies start to do this. We said bro is the best kept secret in network security. It's funny, it's widely used. There are thousands and thousands of organizations out there using open source bro in their environment. But knowledge of bro at an individual level is still, not widespread. I would say, most security professionals may have heard of bro, but it's a minority that really know and understand how to use bro. And so, we want to encourage, obviously, the use of bro, but spread knowledge because it's such a powerful framework. And all of these companies you see here on screen are actively using bro in their environment, and we know this from public sources. So this is data that was obtained from mailing lists or job posts or public talks. So these are all just a sample of some of the thousands of companies that are using bro. How does bro give you better data? We like to say bro is the Goldilocks between Netflow and PCAP. This table you see here, didn't actually, we didn't make it. This comes from a gentleman named Chris Sanders, founder of Applied Network Defense. He's a great, leading mind in security training and building, security teams, and he runs a great training course as well, which you can visit at www.investigationtheory.com. And so he put this chart together, and he was basically trying to show his students how varying types of network data compare. And the first thing you'll notice is that you can kind of split the two into two types, right? There's types that are specific, like VPN access logs. Well, that's only going to give you data about VPN access logs. That's very narrow network visibility. And then there's a few classes of network data that are very broad in scope. You've got PCAP, which is literally all the data crossing your network. It's as broad as it gets. There's Netflow, and then there's bro logs. And you'll notice something interesting, which is bro is almost a straight A student in his graph, or in his chart here, rather. Netflow gets very poor grades for contexts because it doesn't tell you that much about what's happening. And PCAP gets a C in search because it's just way too much data to effectively search at scale, and a D in retention because it costs a boatload to store if you're doing it at scale. Bro gets a C in acquisition, but that he's talking here about the open source implementation of bro, which yes, it can be quite challenging to implement and acquire the data from bro. It takes weeks or months to set up an open source bro instance if you're in a complex environment. Smaller environments or test labs, it's much quicker. And bro really helps along 5 axes in terms of network data. So it's the breadth of what you're seeing, it's the speed with which you can search it, it's the file extraction capability that comes with it, and it's dynamic protocol detection, which is a new term. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but basically bro is very sophisticated in how it understands what kind of traffic belongs in what protocol, and can catch things like bad guys trying to hide themselves in non-standard ports, for example. I'll talk more about how bro does that, but that's what that point means there. And lastly, scriptability, which we've talked about, right? You can actually write your own scripts or use community scripts to make Bro do your bidding and do whatever, automate whatever analysis task you'd like. On the comprehensiveness side, we talked about the logs. Over 400 data fields are extracted by Bro across all of these logs. So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of data fields. And the really neat thing about Bro is, unlike some other DPI-like libraries that are used for analyzing network traffic, Bro was purpose-built for security professionals. It was built by security professionals, designed by security professionals. That means all of these data fields and all of these logs are specifically for security folks. So if a data point's in there, it's because it's useful for someone in security, not necessarily like network performance, for example. Here's a great example of where you can see the depth difference. So on the top, in the color with the colored fields, you see a Bro DNS log. So this is the actual information you would see in a DNS log from Bro. The bottom, you have an example of a DNS server log. Already you can see that Bro is giving you a lot more information here. So you're getting things like the 5-tuple call record, so a full account of the call record, the round trip time, which can help you understand things like latency that might be happening in the system, and in purple there, the content of the response, which is hugely important because in a DNS server log, you're not actually getting the response of what was said, which is critically important in a security context. So already you can see the depth difference that Bro logs offer. Speed of search, up to 20 times faster. That figure actually came from someone we worked with who had never used Bro before and stood up Bro and took his average incident response time down from about 3.5 hours to about 5 minutes. A dramatic increase in his ability to respond to security alerts being generated in his environment. It really is rocket fuel for your environment. Things that make it fast to search, it's uniform, right? All of these fields have been purpose-built and designed by security professionals. The logs are interlinked, so there's unique connection IDs that allow you to very quickly pivot from log to log to log and trace exactly what happened across the wire across different protocols, which is a great feature of Bro that allows for very fast movement. And also, each file gets a unique file ID, and Bro auto hashes the files themselves. So in a Bro log, for example, if you see in an HTTP log, for example, that a file was downloaded and you click on that hash, you could auto look that up via something like VirusTotal, and you could very quickly understand, okay, someone visited a website, a file was downloaded, and then you go to VirusTotal and you could find out, oh, that file is malicious. You know, that you could do that all in a matter of literally seconds. So it's very, very fast for search. This is just a quick example of kind of an incident response investigation with and without Bro. On the left-hand side, if we imagine that maybe you're dealing with an IDS alert, you know, you've got to run through all these steps just to figure out what's going on with that alert and understand the scope of the breach and how to respond. There's a lot of chair pivots. You're going to be searching maybe through PCAP. You're going to have to make sense of which PCAP file you need. It's a lot of manual work, a lot of chair pivots. On the right with Bro, very simple. You just pivot off the connection ID, take a look at the files that may or may not have been downloaded, the HTTP logs. They'll show you, yep, a file was transferred. Quick check that hash. And then the great thing is you can take that hash, plug it back into the Bro logs and say, hey, did any other host download this file in my environment? Bro will tell you that immediately. File extraction, as we talked about, assembled and extracted and reassembled off the wire, and also generates a Bro file ID. So you can pivot within Bro logs and trace file activity or understand the scope of a file, how many people have downloaded it, as I just mentioned, very quickly. Dynamic protocol detection. I'll spend a little more time here since this is a new concept. So as you know, attackers, especially sophisticated attackers, have a lot of tricks up their sleeve on how to hide from detection. And one of those ways, right, is hiding in non-standard ports, putting traffic in, you know, SSL that isn't actually SSL traffic, for example, or, you know, et cetera. So this is an example of a Bro log, a Bro DPD log, which is a dynamic protocol detection log. So that's yet another log that Bro generates specifically around dynamic protocol detection. And if it detects that there's an issue, it generates this. And what you're seeing here in red is Bro was analyzing what, according to the header information, was an SSL connection. So encrypted file, encrypted communication. In many environments, that might be an ignored communication because it's encrypted and you can't drill into it. what Bro actually found is that that wasn't actually an SSL connection. It was an attacker trying to communicate back to their command and control center, trying to hide in an alleged SSL connection. But of course, the error message you see there, invalid version latent TLS connection, is what Bro triggered on to understand, you know what, this is not actually an SSL connection. And in this case, this was actually a real threat that was uncovered because of this log. So a real use case. Scriptability, lastly, again, Bro as a scripting language, you really can do whatever your imagination allows you to envision with Bro and the data that it provides. So if you learn the Bro scripting language, it can become an incredibly powerful tool to fine-tune analysis and automation inside your environment on your network. Installing Bro scripts can be done now via a Bro package manager that was released last year. So the open source community has made it very easy to get Bro scripts into Bro via that package manager. So it organizes all of the community scripts, those 60 plus Bro scripts I mentioned, into a nice package manager. So it makes it very easy for you. Here's a great example of a Bro script that you might find interesting, written by a gentleman named John Sewick. It's a Bitcoin detector, so it detects different Bitcoin activity or cryptocurrency, I should say, mining activity, Bitcoin, Litecoin, and PPP coin as well. So you can install this and basically understand if anyone in your environment is trying to use your network and your endpoints to do cryptocurrency mining, which in places like universities is really important to understand, because a lot of students think electricity is free and try to mine cryptocurrency at the expense of the college. So network security folks want to know about that. Corelight. So who is Corelight? Well, we've built a commercial product that makes Bro easy and enterprise grade. It means much faster time to deploy Bro in your environment, much higher performance than you're going to be able to achieve in an open source implementation. We've baked in a whole suite of enterprise integrations that make Bro really easy to integrate with all of your favorite tools like Splunk or Elastic. Comprehensive monitoring. So we've really spent a lot of time looking at how to manage and monitor these boxes. So you're going to get a lot of rich information about what's going on with your software and hardware, and just general ease of use and manageability. We've taken a lot of steps here to really make Bro a very simple plug-and-play solution. We have 3 appliances in market today by a range of network throughputs. So a 2 gigabit sensor, a 10 gigabit per second sensor, and a 25 gigabit per second sensor. I'll tell you now that in the open source world, the peak performance that we've seen large organizations with very talented security engineers achieve is somewhere between 3 to 4, sometimes 5 gigabits per second per server. So at the high end, you're looking at a 5 to 10x increase over what you can achieve in the open source world. And I'll talk a little bit about why we're able to achieve that as a company in the next slide. But performance is really a big one for a lot of the larger customers of Corelight, is the efficiency gains that come with our products. And if you compare Corelight to open source, because again, open source is free. We want more people using open source Bro. We think it's a great open source framework, and the world would be a better, safer place if more people used it. Why pay for Corelight when Bro is free? Well, there's quite a number of reasons why our customers have bought our products. They really fall into the categories you see at left: deployment, performance, integration, monitoring, management. With Corelight, you're going to get things like automated SIEM exports. So you can literally just log into our web app, type in a few bits of information about, say, your Splunk instance, click a button, and you're off and running, and you've exported your Bro logs directly to Splunk. It takes all of 5 minutes. In the open source world, that's going to take some time. You're going to have to set it up. You're going to have to clean some of the data fields and reformat them for Splunk. It's going to take you some time. And you see deployment there at the top, right? Our appliances really are plug-and-play solutions. It takes people 15 minutes or less to set them up, have them up and running, have them integrated, have log volumes tuned. All of that can be done in a matter of minutes. I once asked a customer, how easy it was to set up one of our boxes, and he responded with a question. He said, "What's easier than easy?" So compared to the open source world, where again, if you're deploying Bro at scale in a large organization, that's going to take you weeks, months. In some cases, we've even seen multi-year-long deployments. It's a dramatic time saving and ease of use. So we're almost at time here, so I want to leave some time for questions. Corelight, I'll talk a little bit about Corelight as a company, why we're able to achieve these advantages here you see on the left-hand column, why the performance advantages are so much higher than the open source world. Well, we kind of have an unfair advantage. Corelight was co-founded by the inventor of Bro and some of its key open source contributors. So Vern Paxton is actually our chief scientist, and some of the key open source contributors are also Corelight employees. And they realized that in their consulting kind of roles in years past, where they were helping people with open source, that there was a business opportunity to build a actual commercial solution that could make all of this automatic and scale their knowledge and scale their expertise across organizations. And so that's what they did, and they founded Corelight. And our engineers spent a good year finding the perfect marriage of hardware and software tweaks to the open source Bro code to be able to get those kind of performance gains that you're seeing with Corelight sensors. And so that's who Corelight is. We are a San Francisco-based company. We have offices across the US and also now in people in Europe as well. So we're expanding globally. And if you're interested in Bro, it's very easy to get a proof of concept going in your environment, whether that's a lab or a production environment. We've got our sensors, which we can ship out to you for a risk-free trial. And yeah, it's very easy with Corelight to get Bro up and running fast and performant and secure, and all of the great enterprise features you would want and expect in a commercial security tool. So with that, I'll leave it open for questions.